Again, thank you. Thank you very much for joining. As you can see now, we will record the seminar today, and it will be published on the project's website. My name is Guy Fox. I work for Naturland, an association for organic agriculture, and we're part of the FutureEUAqua project. I have the pleasure of being the host today of today's session of the FutureEUAqua seminars. And for the duration of the seminar, I would ask you to please mute yourselves. And if any questions pop up, please feel free to ask them in the chat or later in our Q&A sessions. Please just raise your hand and we'll allow you to unmute. Like I said, just a quick note, it is recorded. And just to give a general introduction, for everyone that hasn't joined our seminars, the FutureEUAqua project is part of the Horizon 2020 project with quite a lot of partners, which I'm not going to name all today. The goal of the project is to promote sustainable aquaculture in Europe mainly, and to make it meet future challenges with respect to the many aspects that will be important in our future. Today's topic is the consumer perceptions of the sector. So mainly, how can we improve the consumer perception of the sector? And before I anticipate too much of what we will hear in a minute from our speaker, I'd like to present our speaker. And again, apologies for any mistakes with the name, but our speaker today is Themis Altintzoglou from the Norwegian Food Research Institute, NOFIMA. And I'll happily give over to you.
Yes, thank you. And actually pronounce the name very, very well.
Great.
So I appreciate that. And I will try once again to share my screen, and hopefully it will be without trouble this time. And it looks like you can see my screen now.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So as a guy introduced, it's a topic around consumers and consumer awareness about aquaculture in Europe. And more specifically, I will describe how I came up with information and knowledge, research-based, and finally research-based plan for communication within this project, the FutureEUAqua project.
Themis, are you still here?
Yes, now
yes,
I am,
okay.
but I realized we had the same problem as before when we're testing.
Then I'll just share your presentation over my screen.
Yeah, that sounds more reliable.
And just give me 1 second.
And I think you can give me control, and then I don't have to say next slide, right?
I'll try to do so. We will figure it out. All right, so now we have the screen. I'm not sure how to give you control.
But we can, I can say next slide.
Yes.
It's okay, yep. So we start already from the second slide. Yeah, so we heard a little bit about the project. NOFIMA is all I think I can add is that NOFIMA is leading it, OSA from NOFIMA is leading it, and the project ends this spring. Due to an extension, we had as many projects due to the COVID adventures a year ago. What you see on the right here is the different topics that we cover in the project, but the focus today will be on the bottom part, and that is on consumer awareness. Next slide, please. So the experiment that we run to base in a way to figure out what is the right way to communicate about aquaculture in Europe towards consumers. And we focused mostly on social media. We had 5 experimental conditions. The first one is what you see here. It was not like this, of course, it was like a social media post. And this condition we called factual plus photo, because the focus was on describing RAS and IMTA as good examples of increasing the focus on sustainability in aquaculture in Europe. And the text was what you see here. Sustainable aquaculture in Europe is growing in full control of new feed sources and water quality to deliver high quality fish. So simple, but quite flat for the general public, and fact-based, and the diagrams kind of symbolize that. And the next slide, please. The other extreme in our minds, at least in our design, was the emotional plus photo, where we focused on showing something that triggers more like the deeper reactions in the consumer's mind. And the text was sustainable aquaculture in Europe is making sure that we and our children can enjoy tasty and healthy fish in the future. And the picture shows this, kind of amplifies this emotional and personal aspect. Next slide. And we also had the conditions in between. Let's say if the factual and picture was on one extreme, like too detailed, and the other end was too emotional, then we had in between factual without the pictures, and where the text was the same. We had emotional without the picture, again the same text. And we had the 5th condition, that is control. Like in every experiment, you need to have a control condition that is kind of the standard to which you compare to. And there the text was sustainable aquaculture in Europe is growing with focus on new feed sources, water quality, fish quality, and welfare. And what we measured in this experiment was, first of all, we said like, okay, please imagine that the information above has been posted on Twitter and Instagram, and please pay attention to the image and text and reply to the questions below. And the 3 main measurements was, this post was easy to understand, I like this post, and the 3rd one, I would forward this post on my Twitter and Instagram. We also had extra questions so that would help us explain the results, like the 3 open-ended questions. I like this post because, and then they could write what they wanted. I dislike this post because, blah, blah, blah. And then this post is not interesting because, and then they could write what they wanted. And we added some basic descriptive socio-demographic questions, like how often do they eat wild or farmed fish, education, occupation, the classic questions, the city size they live in, marital status, and use of social media, which would help us explain the results. Who did we contact? Who are our participants? Who were our consumers? We used YouGov, which is a company, a subcontracted company that has access to people, and they can provide representative samples in a very efficient way, which means that we knew that we wanted seafood consumers, so people that do know what they're talking about, and that they're at least partly responsible for the shopping and preparation of food in their households, of course. We wanted to have 500 participants per country, and to be representative of UK, France, Germany, Spain, and Italy. Because of course this is a European project, European study, but you cannot have every country, so we kind of picked some that is commonly done. So what came back from the data collection was, first of all, we look at, okay, did it work? Do we have a gender balance? It looks like we had, it's 50-50, almost males and females. And next slide. We also see that the age representation is as expected for European population. We see what we hear often, that the aging of the population is represented here as well. And here we see the balance of income across the countries. That also seems to be more or less comparable, and more or less what we know that these countries should have more as average. And the number of children that are under 18 in their household. we see that in this case, there were more families that the children either have no children or the children have left their homes. Here is the education level across the countries, and we see that it's not fully balanced, but of course it's something difficult. Once you try to represent the country, you have to sacrifice some things, but we took this into account when analyzing the data. We see, for example, that in France, the education level is, and in the UK, in France and Spain, the education level is a bit higher than in Germany and Italy for this sample. It doesn't mean that this is how it is in the countries. And here is the occupations, so the different kind of jobs that people do to earn their living. And this shows us that across the 5 countries, we had the more or less good spread, all kinds of people, let's say, and also a good balance among the countries. Then we also asked about the area they live in, and here again, a bit like the occupation, we see that we have a good spread. And a fun fact that I decided to leave in the figure is that we often give the option that to answer "I don't know," so that people that don't know don't have to be forced to give us an answer. And here we see that some people in each of the countries don't know if their living area is rural or a big city, or a small town or medium-sized city, which is, yeah, fun fact. But otherwise, we see that we urge to collect data from all sizes and make sure that we represent the whole population and perspectives. And the same goes, and I think this is one of the last sociodemographic figures. The same goes for the marital status. We see that we have a higher representation of married people, which is, I think, representative of the European population. And otherwise, we have enough representation from most of the different marital statuses as well. And now we're getting into the results that go like more into the consumer behavior part, and not because up to now we saw like who is it we're talking about, and now we see what actually happened. And the first thing we did is to run a test that's called, and I know many don't care about statistics or don't know enough, but it's called the general linear model for those that want to check how we did it. And it is, we put experimental conditions and central independent variables against the 3 main measurements to see where is actually the action happening. And we found that the experimental condition, meaning that the 5 different social media posts have had a significant effect on both understanding and liking and that willingness to forward the post. And we also see that the country had a significant effect, so that was also something to look into, and the gender. We expected also age to have an effect, but it didn't. But I will show some results about age as well, because it's just easy and interesting comparison. Yep. So this is a figure of how it was from 1 to 7. You see on the left, agreement of the participants saying that they liked the 5 social media posts. So at the bottom of the figure, you see the factual photo was on the left. Then it was the factual without the photo, the control, the emotional plus photo. And the different colored lines are the countries you see here where the pointer is. So UK in black, Germany in light blue, France in red, Italy in beige, and Spain in very dark blue. I repeat on the side for reference also how many participants we had per country. But the main thing from this figure to look at is that, okay, if you are to report your opinion from 1 to 7, 4 is the middle, which means you don't mind, it's not too bad, it's not too good. 7 is the ideal, you like it very, very much. 1 means you don't like it at all. So in general, the results show that the messages were not disliked, but more like to the liked side, all of them. But with the exception that the factual photo was more, let's say, almost disliked, while the emotional plus photo was at the highest side, or emotional at the highest side, plus photo maybe at the highest side. If you go to the next slide. Here we see two lines, and this is exactly the same figure, but instead of comparing countries, now we're comparing genders. And we see a tendency for females to like all the posts a little bit more. And if we go to the next slide, we see the same figure, but for the 3 age groups. And what we see is quite strong agreement between the age groups when it comes to the factual plus photo, factual part of the social media posts. And then they start playing with each other in a way that we start seeing some variation. So for example, that the middle group there, 35 to 54, is a bit higher than the other two when it comes to their liking about emotional plus photo. The next slide is when we start to look at why could this, what was the problem, or why is it that they like the emotional posts. And this is a result of the open-ended questions, when we said, like, I like this post because, if you remember that I said before. And there they could write openly whatever they wanted. And what you see on the right is what we call the word cloud, and that is an organization. It looks very messy, but it's actually an organization of the words we got from the consumers as a response to why they like this post. And the larger the size of the word, it means the more frequently the word was used. And what we see here is that mostly positive words is like colorful, clear, fish, children, tasty, nice, like, food. Positive words, simple, healthy, are the ones that came up, and this is why they like this post. And if we go to the next slide, we see quite the opposite on why did they dislike the other condition, the one with the factual plus photo, what we see on the left here. And here we see it's like complicated information, confusing, understand, which went not like that they do understand, but that they don't understand. And dislike, unclear. We see that this post, kind of as we expected, is not very attractive. It is more informative, but it doesn't make it attractive. Go to the next. And now I will move into how did we use this new information from the experiment about like ways to communicate, plus, of course, other research we did within this project and in previous projects, and the literature we found on communication campaigns, and how did we put all this together to come with a recommendation for a campaign within FutureEUAqua. So the main aim of this communication strategy is to increase consumer awareness, perception, and acceptance of European aquaculture. And these recommendations we developed are based on scientific literature, also on evaluations of the effectiveness of previous and current communication campaigns that we found available. A consumer survey we had earlier in the same project, and of course this experimental testing of type of social media messages that I just presented here. So when it comes to a general social media communication strategy targeting consumers, what we know from a previous work in the project and the previous project we had more or less the same consortium that was called FutureEUAqua, is that we need to raise awareness through a communication campaign. Of course, that's why we came to this project and to this task. So we need to raise awareness. But what we see from previous campaigns is that we need to avoid a general approach to aquaculture and sustainability. Like, we cannot just say aquaculture is great, it's sustainable, and leave it to that. We can begin by providing general information, but then we need to add more specific details on production systems, for example, organic. And what is the impact this has on the environment? So, for example, a carbon footprint. So not to leave it vague, but more to say, okay, this specific production system can benefit on this specific risk area. What we show from our experiment is also that we need to stimulate consumers' emotions. So not only facts, but people like we all are emotional beings, and we remember more how information makes us feel than what information content really is sometimes. So we need to maximize the possibility to understand, like, and sympathize with a message. And that can be amplified by adding a picture like the one we used here on the experiment. What we see is some specifics that could be like used when targeting specific countries, for example, specific target groups, is that in the UK and France, consumers were the most skeptical, while in Italy and Spain, they were the most positive. Yeah, this means, of course, that you can approach different countries in different ways. And for example, in Germany, that the more factual posts were liked compared to other countries. Even though they also prefer the emotional post, this means that there could be a combination that, for example, every other post or every 3 posts, there could be a factual post to support those that are into this type of information. But all in all, we obviously know that emotional messaging should be used as a main or most frequent strategy. We saw that female consumers are more positive, and they could be targeted as influencers because they could, for example, repost, and then as we all know from social media, it's more powerful when a person posts something than when an organization posts something. We also found that younger participants are less positive about pictures with emotional messages, and they could be targeted without pictures. And our impression about this is that, of course, younger participants might be further away from having children, and that could make them relate a little bit less with this idea of the future. You all know how life changes when you get kids. And the final point for this slide is that the willingness to repost was generally low. And what we take from that is that at least the participants in this study would not just do it. So we need to find a way to motivate them to repost. And that is either by saying, like, you know, remind them, like, repost if you like it, or, but in either way, the communication experts need to keep this in mind as well. We also saw that Facebook is most frequently used by all participants, but the campaign is recommended to focus on Instagram and Twitter, and then a repost or a forward on Facebook is most practical way to do. And that is because we see that younger consumers could be more targeted through Instagram, while 35 to 55-year-olds more through Twitter. At the same time, we see that all 3 social media platforms are used by all, so there's not really an extreme differentiation. I believe that people that use these 3, they interchange and more or less pick one for more frequent use, but yeah, all 3 are quite significant at the moment. We also saw from these word clouds that emotional messaging is liked because it's simple and informative, pleasant colors are used, and there's pictures of food, and it's images of nice and tasty looking fish. While factual messaging is not liked because it can be complicated, confusing, too detailed, maybe unclear, even though it adds more information, maybe cluttered because, I mean, aesthetically, it looks like too much in little space. And it could be difficult to interpret, like, what is this about? Once, I mean, if you're confused, it's difficult to understand as well. And the next slide. We also collected some data that showed us that the economic benefits of aquaculture for the local communities is a challenging topic to understand and to communicate, but it is very positive because it adds this element of social sustainability that people can relate. They can see it's a jobs, it generates business, and it's good for the area that the production is located. At the same time, we have two topics that are very close to the heart of people in general. That's animal and fish welfare and environmental pollution. But they are also very sensitive issues, and I think if the communication is very short, these topics could be avoided because they can generate more shock than learning in a way. But of course, it's open to discussion. And when it comes to specific environmental issues, they could be, at least to start with, familiar words and familiar topics like the CO2 footprint that people have been listening enough about to know what it actually means. If we would target this communication strategy or communication campaign to policymakers, then it could be smart, or it could be wise to use Twitter more and a little bit more technical language. And in other words, I mean, communication is about who you're talking to, not only about what you're saying. So it should be carefully directed towards this specific group. When it comes to young adults and teenagers, the reference to children might not be as effective, and it could be better to focus on the protection of nature for everyone. And then targeting the industry, it could benefit to add labeling advice from, for example, from eye tracking studies we did in FutureEUAqua, but there's also a lot of literature about that. But companies are also interested to say, okay, I am working towards more sustainable aquaculture. I am sourcing my products from a more sustainable aquaculture, but how do I show this? And that's when labeling can be pretty handy and effective. And the visual elements, such as emojis, could be added to increase the effectiveness, but of course they should be done wisely per target group. So you cannot target policymakers or ministry people with same emojis that you target young adults. So this is all details and elements and tools that should be taken into account when going for such a communication campaign. In practice, so this is now going back to how we do things in the project, which I think I mean, it's very useful for us, of course, because we need to do this, or we have been doing this, but I think it's part of the strategy or the campaign plan or recommendation, because if you replace the names with whoever other wants to do this, then you kind of have a bit of like a pathway. So we made a detailed plan of specific social media posts that need to be developed in accordance with increasing awareness of aquaculture in Europe. And then in our case, FEAP was responsible for dissemination, and then they have access to reports, infographics, videos, and pictures. And we needed to attract attention of consumers to this material. To do that, FEAP and NOFIMA's media communication experts generated content for social media posts. And that is, of course, to attract, like we start with very short and attractive and say, if you want to read more, go there. And if you want to read more, here is the full report. And the sources for all that is literature, recent and current communication campaigns, and the FutureEUAqua surveys and experiments. I mean, the sources of how we do things. And the communication material can start with a broad focus on aquaculture, then focus specifically on current and relevant information, and then on production methods, environmental effects, benefits, and challenges. So kind of the typical, like writing an introduction, but the introduction is not the end, it's only the opening of the door, and framing the information towards what we really want to communicate. And again, I have to repeat it because there's been campaigns that left information to the aggregate level and they were not successful. what we see and we recommend here is to pick specific topics that consumers understand and feel for, and talk about them, and not about general issues. Yep. And the concluding one-pager of all this is how we visualized what exactly I've been describing through the last half an hour on one page. So I think it's a nice screen to leave, and maybe later on, if you want to come back to the information to say, oh, what was he talking about? What was the whole conclusion? What's the juice of the story? Then you can only open this slide and print it and stick it on your wall. Yes, thank you. That was the last slide.
All right, thank you very much for the interesting speech. It's nice to get reconfirmed by the results that German like facts. That's quite funny.
Yeah.
Yes, so let's see if there's any questions. I'll just leave the slide open and you can just check. I think there has been something in the chat, so maybe we'll just start with that. The question is from Johannes Simmons. What is the population of the investigation? Is it the ones who eat fish? If so, why is a comparison made with the statistical data of the total population?
Yeah, a very interesting question. And this is one of the decisions we need to make every time. Well, there, the cutting the cutting edge of why we do this is that on one hand, we want to have a representation of the country so that we know that our results can be generalized to say, we found this, we have 500 people of each of the countries, and they represent the country. They are selected by a professional company to be representative. On the other hand, when we come into topics like sustainable aquaculture and potential purchase behavior of people in real life at the shop, we kind of have to make sure that we get information from people that have experienced this before, people that have been in the shop, that they have been eating and buying fish, because we want to avoid that general negativity effect, allergies, and other issues like nutritional choices, for example, vegetarianism or religious reasons of not eating this type of food, like fish. So, yeah, I know there is many ways to roam, or what's the expression, but this is the way we usually choose to kind of accommodate the population, but at the same time get information that we can trust.
Okay, thank you very much. We have another question in the chat. I'll just read it out first. Do you expect different results depending on the media used? For example, social media versus newspaper versus television?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because of course, social media is something that is very practical and it has a very broad reach. And we know that actually increasingly the use of social media is increasingly overweening the use of other media, because, for example, many even read the newspaper through titles in social media. And so in this case, we had to choose, because, I mean, whoever has been in EU projects, you know, that's not endless source of financing. We have to choose some path, and we chose this path. But at the moment, we have been analyzing we're finishing the analysis of the effect of the campaign, and we see that actually, if you want to have a huge effect, a significant effect, if you want to really change how people think, in Europe, it's a very ambitious goal, and it cannot be reached by a small account on social media. It has to be spreading with reposts, and that's why I say this was a very interesting question, because we believe that it has also to be a broad major policy around it to make sure that it is on TV at the same time as social media and on newspapers and on everything, and make this tsunami, yeah, maybe not the best word, but you know what I mean, tsunami effect that, okay, everyone gets to hear about this, because this could generate also discussions in private, that people think about it and say, hey, have you heard that, you know, there's this new production systems, they sound pretty good, and maybe this is the future.
Okay, that sounds good. I think we have one more question. Jonathan Schleiken, would you like to?
Yeah, I think the last answer already answered a little bit, but I also have a question regarding your future expectations. So what is your general estimation regarding the effect of the campaign? What do you expect regarding the outcome?
And now I can cheat, because you heard from my previous answer that we've already been testing that. And so the cheat is that it's not an expectation anymore, but I already have some insight. And that is that the campaign, our measurement before and after the campaign included 3 years, of which the 2 were marked with COVID-19. And after that, the war and the economic effects of the war and the effects on electricity and whatever has been happening in the last year. So what we've been seeing is that we see a change, and we see a change that actually we cannot say that this change we see is from this campaign, because everything else has been so much more significant that we have to be realistic and say, okay, we had the bad luck that the last 3 years have been very difficult, and they really changed the market a lot. And at the same time, such a campaign, we cannot expect to change, like I said before, to change the world, but it can be a starting point, and together with a major policy, how can I say, a decisive plan that's broader than this, can actually have a bigger effect. So as you can hear, I'm very carefully saying that the expected effect was not reached.
Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Is there any other questions? Yes, Johannes Simmons.
Yes. Thank you for the presentation. I've more critical comment. You base your results just on 2 pictures that you showed. This is true, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And they are very different. Perhaps I assume if you had shown a picture of those salmon production in Norway, mm-hmm. with the open sea and the nets in it, the emotions that are triggered by the pictures might be totally different to the way of picture that you showed. So so I would doubt whether you really can make those generalizations with the result, mm-hmm. that emotions is because even those pictures that you showed, they create emotions, certain kind of emotion, to call them factual, but they are emotions. They trigger mm-hmm. emotions too. So I would be careful with that interpretation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much. This is, yeah, I agree with you. I can see your point. An ideal experiment would, of course, be with many pictures on both sides, and then see how different types of pictures of production systems and different type of pictures of people in a daily environment, and maybe more types of pictures. And yeah, I can see your point. And I think in the future it should be probably redone and done maybe with more pictures.
Perhaps we just did an experiment with, but more on the psychological basis. And we showed them different picture of production systems, and we saw huge differences in how they perceive them. And if you show them the technical thing, it's different from the open sea.
Yeah.
And if you have persons in it, it's again different, and so on. So be careful with the generalizing thing.
Yep. Thank you. And I would really appreciate if you could send me your study.
You know, it's so difficult to publish qualitative market research. Sorry.
Yeah,
So
I understand. Yeah.
Okay. If it was not difficult, we could send it to you.
Yeah. Thank you. Very interesting. So it was a qualitative study of people discussing the different pictures and how. Very
we
interesting.
looked at the impact that different pictures can have, and we tried to systematize that.
I think this is also the beauty of qualitative research is you can go broader and deeper into understanding how people respond. While in an experiment, you're kind of pushed in corners to keep control and minimize a little bit, and then you lose, of course, the options, like the number of options, or
you pay a high price for what you could call objectivity or control.
Yeah, I think the ideal would be to take both these studies and put them together and see how, and then conclude. Yeah, very interesting. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for the comment. Do we have any other questions? If not, I think we're quite good in time. We've posted a few links to further information about the FutureEUAqua project in the chat. Also, I'll just quickly share my screen again. Just give me a second, because my laptop's also not the quickest. To just have a quick outlook on what's to come. All right. Yes, so I hope everyone can see my screen now. So yeah, we today heard the topic consumer perception of the sector. I need to announce that unfortunately the next topic, sustainable and resilient production systems, next week Tuesday will be postponed. So we will have to skip this seminar, but we will get back to you and inform you about the postponed date later in the weeks. Again, yeah, afterwards we will have another seminar on Internet of Things for healthy fish and environment and quality and safety of aquaculture products. And we would, of course, be happy to see you again. If you have any information, if you need any information or have any issues with registering or so on, please be sure to contact either me or my colleague Stefan Holler via the email as listed here. And yes, if you want further information, you can always visit the FutureEUAqua site. And with that, I would like to conclude today and thank our speaker again for the interesting presentations and for the interesting questions afterwards. And yeah, if there's any questions, anything, please feel free to get in touch with us. We posted a small link to a feedback questionnaire in the chat. We would really appreciate if you take 1 or 2 minutes to fill that out. Thank you, everyone. And I wish a pleasant weekend.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.